Hi, everyone. Great to see you today. Welcome to day 2. For those in person, for those online, thank you so much for joining us for this very interesting panel that I'm very happy to moderate on digital policy and practice. So I have 2 expert speakers with me today who are going to speak to perspectives from Switzerland and Ukraine. One speaker is joining us online, and then, of course, we have here Ms. Nina Frey in person with me here in Basel. So Nina Frey is the Deputy Head of Division for the Swiss Digital Foreign Policy. As some of you may or may not know, in 2021, Switzerland became one of only a few countries to actually put out a digital foreign policy. So what we are going to discuss today is what exactly this digital policy is, what the priorities are, and I'm really looking forward to hearing also the action plan and how to implement digital foreign policies. And also, of course, because as mentioned, I work on digital peace building, I'm curious to know where the digital peace building fits in also to the digital foreign policy. Welcome, Nina.
Thank you.
Our second speaker is actually going to join in about 5 minutes. He's coming directly from another event, and his face is going to pop up on here at some point, but I'm going to introduce him now so that you know who he is when you see his face appear. He's joining from Ukraine. His name is Mr. Alex Bornyakov, and he's the Deputy Minister of Digital Transformation for IT Development in Ukraine. So Alex leads the Ukraine DIA City project, and one of the aims of this is to turn Ukraine into the largest IT hub in Europe. And you know, Ukraine has, I think for quite a while now, been a leader in technology and innovation. But now we see Ukraine leading in rapid adaptation of how to adapt digital strategies and how to kind of do digital transformation of the implementation strategies to provide support for citizens during active war. So I'm very curious to know more about this from Alex once he joins us. So as you know by now, if you were here as yesterday, also at the Basel Peace Forum, our theme is Beyond Borders, which I think is quite an interesting one for digital topics because digital does not really respect borders in many ways. So I want to talk about this kind of international and borderless aspect of digital technology and of digital policy on this panel, and then get into, as I said, some more practical implementation. How exactly do you go about in these 2 contexts implementing digital strategies, and what can we learn for other contexts? I'll tell you now to the audience, there will be a little time for Q&A at the end, so start thinking of your questions. It's going to operate the same as yesterday. For those of you here, there's a microphone we'll pass around, and I have the chat open here. If something comes through online, for those watching online, you can put it into the chat. Okay, so Nina, let's start here. Just can you give us an introduction? What exactly is the Swiss digital foreign policy? How is it important to the overall Swiss foreign policy? And then maybe what unique role does Switzerland have, and maybe specifically Geneva, in the implementation of this strategy?
Thank you. Well, thank you so very much for being interested in that topic and for bringing us here. Just one remark, if you allow me, before, because you said it's about the border topic and digital space doesn't have borders, because I found it very interesting when you read about that you had borders and digitalization, because I think it makes you believe that there's no borders, because it's, in a way, data can be wherever they are, but in the other way, if you remember during COVID, when you had to use the certificate, people had to talk to each other to make sure that you can even show your certificate when you go to Paris, for instance, and it's being recognized. So I think there are borders, and there's a need that people actually talk together and agree together. So yeah, I think that's a good swift to why we need a digital foreign policy. Indeed, I think the Swiss government already in its foreign policy strategy, the ongoing one, have put digitalization as one of the key priorities. Why? It's because digitalization, I think we all know, offers huge opportunities for diplomacy, for poverty reduction, for also sustainable development, hopefully also for peace building. I think we're going to talk about that. But of course, it also has huge risks. We talk about cyber risks. We also talk about fake news or making an influence of elections and so on. So our government has put that, as I said before, already in the foreign policy strategy, but they have elaborated a specific strategy that's called digital foreign policy. It's ongoing until next year, and that they try to focus a bit more specifically on how we can tackle this new tech and new tech developments in all the different foreign policy fields. So it's quite a broad one, and I have told you, I think I'm going to make just a very, might seem meta-level introduction, and we will go to more specific examples later on in the discussion. So it has basically been summarized in 4 fields of action. The first one is governance. So that's maybe one of the questions, is the interoperability that I mentioned before with the COVID certificates, but it's of course also the questions, what rules apply in the digital space? Is it the same? Is it different ones? So this kind of discussions. The second field of action is the cybersecurity, which I think explains by itself. The third one is all the questions with respect to sustainable development, but also prosperity, so close the digital divide, for instance. And the fourth field of action is called self-determination, which is a bit more difficult to understand maybe, but it's basically all the questions with respect to digital sovereignty. What happens to your data? Do you have an influence on it or not? Where does it lay? Who owns it? And so on. That's kind of the 4 fields of action, but as you can see, it's basically all the different tasks of foreign policy anyway. So the idea is really to see what makes sense to use in the different thematic fields, also what kind of digital tools, like deep learning, for instance, or blockchain, as we discussed before, can you use to enable maybe ongoing projects? What you have to think about when you, for instance, an example, humanitarian work, you have to collect data of people, of displaced people, for instance. But what happens to this data? Where do they go to a public cloud? Do you need a private cloud? So it's really all these questions that should be thought about. And you asked me to also say something about Geneva. You know, Geneva is the second biggest UN hub. It's also a place that Switzerland is very proud of to be a host state. Try to offer a place where open dialogue is possible, different sides can talk. Also, when you have block building, that the blocks can come together and find solutions. You have a very broad ecosystem of humanitarian actors, environment actors, so we can really try to also establish Geneva as a digital hub where it's really all the human-centric topics are being discussed anyways. And this is also one of the goals of the strategies, to really help or promote Geneva as a digital hub, where we can link it to the ongoing discussions in New York for the UN Global Compact that I think they will be start to negotiate in the coming month. So that can we really also build and use all the expertise that's already existing in Geneva to these UN discussions in New York. And finally, we also try to, I mentioned before, like the block building. So we could just host a senior European dialogue in Geneva some month ago. So we really try also to bring different actors together to talk, to find solutions. And if you want me to continue, I mentioned the host state before. You might know that ICRC has its headquarters in Geneva, many different UN organizations, and Switzerland has so far been like offering support in like building, like in the analog world, still offering the buildings. You know, probably the UN. Immeubles, the buildings, right, in Geneva. So now we're really also reflecting how can we become a digital host state? Do we have to find new ways? Do we have to help the organizations to become more cyber resilient, to have a bigger cyber maturity, talk about what they need in terms of data architecture and so on. So this is, in some words, like what the work we're doing at the moment. And I see the colleague online, so.
Yes, Alex is here. Hi, Alex.
Hi.
Welcome.
Hi, Emma.
Good to see you. I gave an introduction to you at the beginning, so you are on the screen. Everyone can see you, but they already know who you are. So thanks for joining us.
Appreciate it.
And thank you, Nina. That was great. I was like taking notes, so I definitely have follow-up questions. It also sounds like, I mean, it's a lot to cover, actually. So I'm looking forward to continuing on that. Since Alex is here, I'm going to switch over to you, Alex, and ask you maybe if you can give us also kind of an introduction to the Ukraine digital transformation strategy, also how that might relate to Ukraine's foreign policy, and then also, if you could maybe mention why it's important for Ukraine to have a healthy startup ecosystem and how that's all connected.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to be a part of the Basel Peace Forum and talk about the role of technology and the digital strategy and other things that we did pretty unique from digital transformation perspective. I think our strategy started from the vision that President Zelensky said when he was, I think it was happened right after he was elected, and basically this vision is we want to build country in smartphone. So it was like, or digital state. So this was like the whole thing, and as a vision. But we put this, and after that, he created this Minister of Digital Transformation 3 years ago. And I think the strategy was to, in the first place, it looked like move 100% of government services online. But then we figure out that the strategy also has to include that we have to provide high-speed broadband internet connection to majority of the population. So basically, we put a goal that 95% of Ukrainians will have access to this broadband high-speed internet, and also to teach people digital skills. And we put a goal, and the strategy was to teach 6 million Ukrainians digital skills, and also integral part was to develop and grow IT industry of Ukraine. So the KPI was IT industry has to bring 10% of Ukrainian GDP. And it also includes development of startup ecosystem. Again, part of the strategy was to create an institution that will keep up with the digital transformation no matter what, and even if government changes, because Ukraine is a big country, and has a lot of government authorities. So we created an institution called Chief Digital Transformation Officers, and this is basically new position. Operating on the level of deputy minister or deputy governor in each region, and we call them CDTO, Chief Digital Transformation Officer, and they operate both at national and regional level, and coordinated by a ministry. So this way, we ensure that even after we'll be removed from cabinet of minister, at some point, someone in this institution will continue to do all the digital transformation tasks. In order to achieve all of these 4 strategic goals, we launched the digital state brand name called DIA, which is basically acronym for government and I. So it's government application that right now installed on more than 18 million devices. I think we covered like every second Ukrainian. If we exclude children, I think almost like 70 or 80% of Ukrainians are using DIA. It's tremendous results. And if you can, like 3 years ago, no one could have thought that this could be on so much scale. I recently heard that what Estonia did for 22 years, we did for 3 years. Among products that we launched under this DIA brand umbrella is DIA Business, DIA Education, DIA City, which is a special tax and legal framework for IT industry to incorporate IT business and drive development of startup and venture ecosystem. I think that's the brief description of the strategy. And of course, maybe to your second question, to add to the second question quickly, I mentioned DACD, and DACD is not just their tax benefits. It's a whole bunch of tools for venture ecosystem that basically makes it very similar to the rules and the legal structure, legal tools that people in United States, in Canada, in Europe, in other countries used to, like convertible notes, indemnities for startup owners, and many other things that liquidation preferences that never existed before in Ukrainian law. So this way, we want to ensure that if a venture investor want to make a deal with the Ukrainian startup, it basically used the same tools as in America. So that was the part of it. It worked. Also, we were developing venture and startup ecosystem by creating what we call the Ukrainian Startup Fund. It's a government institution that basically were given early checks for early stage startups. So government eventually, after 2 years, turned into biggest angel investor in the country. So we as a government were stimulating on early stage, and then we created conditions to for those companies to incorporate in Ukraine, and for investor to be able to invest in those companies. That's really brief, but I want to leave it to you at this point.
Great, thank you. You know, as you were speaking, I was thinking how my first idea I had for how I would plan this panel was really to focus on digital foreign policy in particular. And then there's not, basically there's many countries that are doing so many interesting things on digital policy that might not have an actual, document called digital foreign policy, but that we can see this international side. Both of you have mentioned these things now in terms of this public and private kind of partnership that needs to happen, or using technology that comes from other countries and things like that, or also with the COVID borders and things like this. So anyway, these are the things I'm thinking about of how we kind of, wrap our heads around borders and digital. So both of you mentioned, touched on many examples. I'd love to give you each a little more time to give us some more examples of so, now we've heard some of the things that you're working on, but maybe how do you go about upskilling 6 million Ukrainians, to use the DIA app and all of the other services? And likewise, with all of the different things that you're talking about, where do you begin when you have such a long list of things? Nina, let's start with you.
Thank you. Well, I think just what I thought about when you try to bridge the digital transformation of a country or digital foreign policy, I think the common denominator is exactly trying to understand the new technology that's really developing at the exponential level, and then see. And I think you have to understand it to a certain degree. Of course, you don't need to be able to code, but you need to understand it to a certain degree of the possibilities, and then you can try to match it with either internal tasks such as taxes or whatsoever, or foreign policy. At the end of the day, it's the same. You just have to try to see how you can use it to enable your policy maybe, or to scale it up. I think that's one of the one of the focus areas that we have started with, because as you said, it's really quite a big task to implement such a big strategy, and we are a team of 6 people, just to give you some perspective. So at the one hand, we of course also need to kind of work as incubators and try to work with the rest of the foreign ministry in a way of a matrix system. So we don't work like the human rights people in their silo, the international security people in their silo, but that we try to take a specific topic and make them work together. And maybe our role could be to incubate and giving some digital skills maybe as well, and see, okay, maybe we could use blockchain technology to reflect about dealing with the past, as an example. So the one area is really that we look into different technologies, and we have one specific, just as an example, we have one specific study that we're doing with ETH Zurich on how we look into the different stages of negotiations and see where could we use deep learning or artificial intelligence in the different stages of a negotiation. So usually starting collecting information on the topic you're negotiating about. What is quite evident that you could use maybe language models to make resumes to find different informations that you need to prepare yourself for a negotiation. Then during the negotiation itself, I'm not saying we're using this, but you should be aware that now technology is able to read emotions, or starting to be able to read emotions. So you need to be aware of this, that you can then decide whether you want to, if you do virtual negotiations, whether you want to put on the camera or not, etc. And then, of course, doing the report on what's being said, or making propositions of text for agreement. So this is all ideas where you could use probably new technologies. And again, we're just doing a study on this, not to decide, yes, we want to do it or not, but to at least make our colleagues and also the people in charge aware of the different possibilities. I can give you some other examples.
If you want,
short, yeah?
If you want, maybe one or so more.
I think we're going to talk more about peace and mediation at a later stage, no? Because that would be another example, and maybe a third one, also quite classical diplomatic tasks is bilateral visits. We call it, we have these official visits, for sure you've seen. Sometimes if, for instance, Foreign Minister Cassis or State Secretary goes to France or the US, and so on. And we have already made some experiences with doing real virtual visits, but not just a virtual talk or like a virtual panel as right now, but real like an official diplomatic virtual visit. Federal Councillor Sommaruga has done it, I believe, like 2 years ago to San Francisco. So usually we would do it when it's a bit far away, so for ecological reasons, of course, also for maybe time-saving reasons. So it was really full 2-day official visit where she even visited regions of San Francisco with someone who was with the bike, so she could see.
Interesting.
So this is it seems quite like easy to do, but you just have to kind of, as always, see how you can like do the analog world experiences, how you can apply it virtually. So just very few examples. There's many more, but I want to leave space to my other speaker as well.
Thank you so much. That was great to hear. Alex, I'd love to hear some more examples from you. I thought I'd mention one other thing that I mentioned in the intro before you joined, is that my impression as an outsider looking at what I can see from Ukrainian digital policy is that it strikes me as being kind of a tech agile approach. I mean, when I read about it, I can see things adapting quickly. It seems to move at a different pace, maybe than other ministries that I would follow. I don't know if that's true, and maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the implementation strategies and how you go about that.
Yeah, I probably start with the One of the you mentioned this in your question, like how we get this audience for and engage people. I think the answer is, and maybe that's important to hear to everyone, that at the beginning we were reviewing all the IT system in the country, and they were basically created for the desktop computers. So, but today, like for everyone, lives is here in his phone. So we came up with a concept called mobile first. So everything we were creating for all these years, starting from 2019, was first. It was only for mobile. So we spent a lot of time to figure out how to put all these complex government services, and they sometimes really complex and difficult, to make it easier to refactor them, so they will be easy to use from your phone. And this strategy actually paid off, because there was a right decision to make. And eventually people found out that, yes, I don't need to go online from computer, or I don't need some files or a USB key or anything else. I can do everything from my phone. So I think that was the answer to question how we started this engagement. And maybe as example, we started to think what would be our I don't know, most popular thing that people like the majority of people will use and follow. And we found out that this is just digital driver license, because this is a common problem. You always forget these papers, and then police stops you, or I don't know, you come to bank and you need to show your ID, and you don't have the ID with you. You have to go home. And we put the basic documents that government issue to its citizen into smartphone, and people love it, really. Again, I remember also we were 6 people in the beginning. Right now we are kind of like 200 people working in the ministry, but. Minister Fedorov at the beginning said he want to build IT company working in a government. So basically, our rules, our procedures are very similar to private IT company, it's kind of hard to follow, because it's a lot of bureaucracy. It's still like enormous amount of bureaucracy, but we're trying to distinguish teams and people who are doing products and projects from the team that has to follow procedures. And basically, our products are a combination of efforts of those 2 teams. But what we're trying to do is not to intersect them. Because if you're putting, like, I'm a deputy minister, right? And I'm official. I'm government official, but if I want to do both projects and bureaucracy, I'm probably stuck for years with some projects. So in my division, I have people who take care about bureaucracy and people who completely outside of this, and they working on agile-based with agile-based approach, and this actually gives results, also pays off, because this way we're able to deliver things a couple times faster than usual. Yeah.
Thanks. I have maybe a follow-up question for both of you, of thinking about capacity building, I guess. I mean, when you're talking, Alex, I'm wondering, I can see that a lot of people would love to have these services on their phone, but you mentioned earlier, Nina, the digital divide. I'm wondering, with like generational gaps and things, if like how you try to, in Ukraine, make sure everyone feels comfortable using that app, and et cetera, beyond the app as well. And I'm also wondering, what it's like to kind of upskill diplomats or others working in government to like be open to doing these like digital official visits and beyond that as well. So what are the approaches? Maybe Alex will stay with you and you can answer that one.
Yeah. We actually made a research at the beginning, and we found out that general level of digital literacy in Ukraine below average. So this is a really huge problem, and I don't think it's a problem for Ukraine. I think it's a common problem for every country, especially where there's a lot of older population, which is a whole Europe, I think. We decided to make a platform where people can get answers in very simple form, and this form were YouTube videos with local celebrities explain basic things. Like we have taken celebrities that my mother and from the generation of my father and my mother, or even older, so not just I don't know, TikTokers or bloggers, but famous people who our parents know, and they were explaining complex things in a simple form. And since they're famous people, they want to hear them, and they were talking about this. It actually worked. We had couple 100,000 people went through this platform. We were giving them the digital literacy certificates, but it also was a breakthrough at some point. This happened when COVID hit us in 2020, and we made digital COVID certificates. So our audience immediately increased because people wanted to have COVID certificate in a digital form, and because you had to go to restaurant, to shop, to everywhere in the public place, you had to show. And instead of going with a paper, you could have it in a smartphone, and it immediately increased our user base. Later on, we have added a pension. I don't know how it's called in English. So it's basically pension ID. So if you're retired, you get a pension ID and you have certain benefits with it. So this was also kind of like offering a service which only certain group of citizens can use. Also brought them closer to us. So summarizing this, I would say that we were thinking about how to engage people in a different way, in a fun way, like gamification, in giving them what they want, but of course they have to learn somehow how to use it. And we saw that sometimes for different groups, people, this option works. For other group of people, other option work. So I think my summary will be that you have to offer different options to people. Mm-hmm. Not just telling them, this is the only way, just install the application, run 12 steps, and this is the only way you can get it. But give them options, and eventually they come back to you.
That's a great point. Thanks. Nina?
Thank you. Well, I would be interested to learn your experience from Alex on the, applying a private company approach in a ministry. So I might reach out to you on this. No, I think it just first of all it needs education, and people need to experience the advantages as with every new technology in general. And I think maybe I can give you an example about like peace building, so we can still cover this topic as well, which is, for ministry, as you as well probably have experienced, and forms that you apply when you, for instance, want to make different sides talk to each other, right? So you had that for many centuries, or at least decades, and now you just probably with respect to digital mediation, you just try to use a new form. And I told you this morning I was at the dentist because I had like some tooth issues. Apparently it broke, and it makes it that bacteria could go in, and you don't notice it, but it starts, doing things it shouldn't do. And it made me think about the cyber incidents, where sometimes you don't notice it at the beginning, but then it starts maybe just being a bit annoying. Maybe some sites get hacked, but it can eventually become more severe if you don't go to the dentist, or like in case of cyber, the experts there. And one example that Switzerland that we are trying to strengthen is this kind of discourse. So you have the experts, they're called CERTs. So every country, and also many of the companies, have cybersecurity experts that deal with incident response. So in case of you have an attack or just something that they feel is not going well, just say it the computer to make it a bit easier, they might notice it. And usually they have a lot of exchanges amongst the different companies, but also amongst the different countries. Why? Because very often an attack can be not only in one country or one company, but in several. So if you think about my tooth, it's the same principle. You put the different, before it really gets very worse, we try to put the different experts together. Then they have to establish the trust, so they can talk to each other, so they can say, I've discovered this incident. Do you have the same? They can, and in case of it gets really big, they already have established communication channels. So this we are trying together with other partners. For instance, there's a publicly known example. It's from DCAF with some countries that might also have some problems with each other. So you bring them the emergency responder teams together, but you also should include diplomats or foreign policy people, so they learn from this specific context, and then in case if it gets worse, you have established channels. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And hopefully to reply to your questions about how you educate or skill develop people, hopefully eventually my colleagues who might not be so familiar with new tech see that and find it interesting and try to apply similar principles to their topics. Mm. I think in general, like tech companies, and I think Alex has mentioned it as well, they become more and more powerful, not only in terms of economic power, as we can see if you compare GDPs, but also like the factual power, the role they play in Ukraine at the moment. You mentioned it before, but in general, the role they play in all our lives is just so disproportionately important. But at the moment, they're not really part of any existing governance act. We do have, usually, the governance, as I mentioned before, is being done amongst member states of the United Nations, for instance, or OECD, or Council of Europe. So we have to, and we are reflecting on how we can establish a more formal dialogue with tech companies, similar to tech dialogue, like not tech, but tech dialogues we have amongst countries. And that covers maybe also a little bit your question. We are, of course, more looking outside its foreign policy. So ideally, in terms of coherence, of course, we would be a fully digital, transformed country. It makes it more credible. But I think we shouldn't wait to be that, to start having also a digital foreign policy. But of course, it helps if you have the leaders that are digitally savvy. Of course, that helps. But as I think Alex mentioned it as well, you need just to work closely and create good examples so that everyone learns a bit about the advantages and the risks. That's what 1 minute allows me to answer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alex, go ahead.
I'll group to you. Yeah, I think to the question, IT industry of Ukraine played a significant role in building all these things that we using right now as a government services. I'm not sure if you're aware, but Ukraine was famous before the war of its IT industry. 300,000 people, more than 5,000 companies, and we asked them to help, and they said, "Yeah, we're willing to help." And they gave a lot of resources, expertise to build architecture of these products, to build design, user experience, everything. So we continue to work with them. So I think we're lucky to have them, because usually, if a country want to digitally transform itself, it has to find some big consulting companies, and often outside of the country. In case of Ukraine, we didn't do this. We just asked our friends and companies from Ukraine, and they were willing to help pro bono, because they wanted to change the country for good too. So that's really helped us. Yeah, that will be my short, brief answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I know, it's never enough time, but I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you to both our speakers for taking time out of your busy day to join us at Basel Peace Forum and talk about digital policy and practice. I learned a lot. I think the audience did too. Those were great questions. Thank you.